I still set 2 cups every morning, even though I know the chair across from me will stay empty. It's been 7 weeks since Margaret passed, 47 years married, and somehow the silence she left behind is louder than anything I've ever heard. I wake up before the sun, the way I always did when she was here. Not because I need to, just because I don't know what else to do with myself. I boil the water the same way she liked it, not bubbling, just hot enough to steep. I still open that tiny tin of Earl Grey she adored. I catch myself waiting for her to say, "Too much, Harold. You always overdo it." But there's nothing, just the faint scent of bergamot in the air. And the ache, that porch. We built it together with our own hands back in '84. Every nail in that railing, every splintered board. We laid them down one summer afternoon while the radio played softly in the background. She wanted it facing east so she could watch the sunrise while sipping tea. I remember laughing at her back then. I didn't understand the peace she saw in small things. Now, I sit out here alone, and I'd give anything to hear her laugh one more time. I talk to her sometimes, not out loud, not yet, just in my head. I tell her about the birds that keep building nests in the gutters again, about the neighbor's cat who thinks my garden is a litter box, about how I can't find the right laundry detergent because she always bought it and I never paid attention. The stupid things, the tiny, ordinary things that made up our life. I didn't cry at the funeral. People say that's because I'm strong. I'm not. I just haven't found the place inside me where the tears are hiding. Or maybe I buried them. I was too busy shaking hands, accepting casseroles, listening to the priest say words that didn't feel like they belonged to her. Margaret didn't like fanfare. She liked truth. She liked simplicity. That whole service felt like a stranger's goodbye. Now here I am, 73 years old, alone in a house that still smells like her hand cream and lavender drawer liners. I haven't moved her pillow. I wash her cup and dry it carefully every day, though no one touches it but me. I'm not looking for sympathy. That's not why I'm telling you this. I'm telling you because I didn't know it was possible to miss someone so much that your body actually hurts. Not a metaphor, a real ache. In the chest, in the bones, in the way your hands tremble when you fold laundry and find a single sock that hasn't been worn since the hospital. That sock broke me. I found it 2 nights ago, tucked inside the dryer, still faintly warm from the heat. Pink with tiny white flowers, her favorite pair. I sat down on the floor and held it like it was something sacred, something holy. I think I whispered, "I'm sorry, but I don't remember why." Maybe I just felt guilty for still breathing. She used to say I was stubborn, that I'd outlive us both just to prove her wrong. Maybe she was right. There's a robin that comes to the porch railing every morning now. It started the week after she passed. It hops along the edge, looking at me with those twitchy little eyes, like it's asking, "What happened to her?" I want to answer. I want to tell it everything. But I just sit. I sit and sip and stare at the space where she used to tuck her legs beneath her on that wicker chair. I can still see the imprint of her body on the cushion, faint but undeniable, like the memory of warmth on skin after a long embrace. It's strange how grief sharpens the senses. I notice everything now. The way the tea cools faster without her conversation to stretch the time. The creak in the third porch step. The sound of wind pushing dry leaves against the screen door. The world didn't stop when she left. But mine did. That morning on the porch, I whispered something I'd never said before. It came out of me like breath I didn't know I was holding. "Margaret, I don't know how to be alive without you." There was no answer, only a soft breeze, only the stillness. But then, just as I finished the last sip of tea, I heard something odd, a sound I hadn't heard in weeks, maybe longer. A bark, a sharp, lonely, desperate bark. I turned my head slowly. At first, I thought I imagined it. But no, there it was again, closer. A rustle by the side gate, then a low, pitiful whimper. It was the sound of something needing something. Someone. Me. Wonderful. Continuing now with, I found the bottle on her nightstand this morning. It was still half full. That little glass spray she always used on the bed sheets. Lavender and chamomile, the label said. She sprayed it every night, even during her last weeks, when her hands had started to tremble. I used to tease her, say the room already smelled like her. She'd smile and say, then it'll smell like love. Now it smells like absence. There's something cruel about how scents linger longer than people. I opened the cap today and the memory hit me so hard I had to sit down. I could see her again, sitting at the edge of the bed, brushing her hair, that same rhythm every night, like a metronome for our life together. She always brushed exactly 50 times. She said it helped her think clearly before sleep. And now, even though the brush still sits neatly on her side of the dresser, the silence in the room makes it feel like a museum or a mausoleum. I don't know which. That little bark from yesterday, I thought about it all night. It echoed in my chest, bouncing off walls that no longer answer back. I didn't go to the window. I didn't move. I just lay there, with my hand on her pillow, eyes open in the dark. This morning, I found muddy paw prints near the garden bed. Small ones, thin, hesitant, the kind left by something hungry or cold or both. I stood on the porch with my tea scanning the yard, but it was empty again. Funny how quickly I've learned to expect emptiness. Around noon, I decided to open her closet. I hadn't touched it since she left. Part of me thought I never would, but something about that smell, the lavender, the way it clung to everything, made me want to remember her more completely, not just as the woman who disappeared into machines and antiseptic bed sheets, but as the woman I danced with barefoot in the kitchen while dinner burned on the stove. Her clothes are still there, perfectly folded, just like she liked them. Sweaters arranged by color, scarves rolled into tight little spirals. I ran my fingers across a blue cardigan she wore almost every Sunday. It still had a hair snag near the collar. That tiny detail, that tiny real piece of her, brought something warm to my chest. Not comfort exactly, just closeness. I sat on the edge of the bed and buried my face in that cardigan. I didn't cry. Not then. Not yet. Later, I sat by the window with the newspaper open but unread. The house creaked the way old houses do. Long, tired sighs through wood and wall. The kind of sounds we used to joke about. That's just the house settling, she'd say, when we first moved in. We were young then. She used to keep plants by the window. Now they're all wilting, even though I water them. I guess I'm not as gentle as she was. At around 4 in the afternoon, I saw him. That dog. Thin, ribs visible beneath matted fur. One ear folded. He stood just outside the garden, looking toward the house. Like he was deciding whether he'd be welcome. Like he'd seen too many doors close on him before. He didn't bark this time. Just stood there. I opened the screen door slowly. He backed up. "It's all right," I said, surprised at how dry my voice sounded. "I'm not going to hurt you." He watched me. Didn't run, didn't move closer. I stepped out with a small bowl of leftover stew. Not much, just some broth, a few scraps of potato and chicken. I set it down by the flower bed and stepped back. He inched closer. A few sniffs, cautious steps, then hunger won. He devoured it fast. Too fast, like he hadn't eaten in days. I didn't try to pet him, didn't talk again, just watched. And for the first time in weeks, I felt like I wasn't alone. When he finished, he looked up at me, not with fear, but something else. Not trust, not yet, but recognition, as if he understood something in me, like he could smell the emptiness, like he knew what grief looked like because he'd worn it too. I went inside and left the door open just a crack. He didn't follow, but he didn't leave either. He curled up beside the porch steps and closed his eyes. I sat back in my chair and watched the sun start to sink behind the trees. The shadows grew longer, and I thought about how quiet it was. Not the sharp silence of grief anymore, but something softer. Something that made room for a second heartbeat. When I went to bed that night, I left the porch light on. I don't know why. Maybe because I wanted him to know he could stay. Maybe because I didn't want to feel like the only breathing thing in this house anymore. The lavender smell was still there, but now it didn't feel quite so hollow. There's a bench at the far end of Sycamore Park, near the Rose Garden. Margaret and I used to sit there on Sundays, after church. We'd bring a small thermos of tea, sometimes a slice of cake wrapped in a napkin. I remember how she'd close her eyes and tilt her face up toward the sun, like she was memorizing the warmth. I hadn't returned since the funeral, until today. The dog, I still hadn't named him, followed me the whole way. Not close, not on a leash, just present. 10 paces behind, head low, like he wasn't sure he belonged. I understood the feeling. We were two shadows drifting through a world that moved on without us. The park was alive with weekend chatter, children shrieking near the swings, joggers passing in pairs, earbuds in. Young couples sprawled across picnic blankets, laughing into each other's shoulders. I felt like I was walking through glass, visible, but not seen. I found our bench. The wood had aged since I last sat there, weathered with cracks. A soft layer of pollen dusted the slats. I brushed it away with my sleeve and sat down slowly, joints protesting with the same familiar stiffness. The breeze carried the faint scent of roses and cut grass. For a moment, I almost felt peace. Then the absence sat beside me, like it always does. People passed, of course. One woman walked her golden retriever by, gave a polite nod, then looked away before I could return it. A boy threw a frisbee, which landed nearby. He retrieved it without speaking, eyes darting past me like I was part of the bench. A fixture, a tree stump. That's what grief does, I think. It turns you invisible. Not in a cruel way, just quiet. People look at you and instinctively step around the sadness, like it might cling to their clothes. The dog lay beneath the bench, panting quietly. His ribs no longer pressed so harshly against his skin. I'd given him some leftover toast that morning. He ate slowly this time. He was beginning to trust me. I watched the sunlight flicker through the trees, dappling the path in gold. That was Margaret's favorite time of day. She called it God's soft hour, said the light seemed kinder just before it slipped away. A girl approached, maybe 10 or 11, freckles across her cheeks, hair in braids. She walked right up to the bench and pointed at the dog. "Is he yours?" Her voice was clear, unafraid. I opened my mouth and realized I hadn't spoken all morning. "Not exactly," I said. "He just started showing up." She looked at me for a moment, then crouched down, extending her hand to the dog. He sniffed it, cautious, then allowed her to scratch behind his ear. "He's a good dog," she said. "I think so," I replied. She smiled. "You should name him." "I'm thinking about it." She stood, gave the dog one last pat, and skipped off toward a woman sitting on a picnic blanket. Her mother, probably. Before rejoining her, she turned and called back to me. "You look like someone who would name a dog something old-fashioned, like Nino." I blinked. "Nino," I repeated softly, like tasting a word I didn't know I already liked. After she left, I looked down at him. "What do you think? Nino?" His tail thumped once against the dirt. Nino it was. I sat on that bench a long time. Eventually the park emptied. The sun dropped lower, throwing long shadows across the pavement. The air cooled. I watched the last jogger disappear down the path and realized something strange. I hadn't thought of the hospital all afternoon. Not once. Not the machines. Not the pale light. not the beep that stopped when she slipped away. Just the roses, just the wind, just the dog. We walked home slowly, Nino beside me now instead of behind. I stopped at the corner store and bought a tin of sardines. I don't even like sardines. Margaret did, said they were an acquired taste for old souls. I laughed when she first said it. Now I bought them out of habit. And maybe to keep her close. The cashier, a teenage boy with a nose ring, barely looked up. "That all, sir?" I nodded. He scanned the tin and handed me the change without a word. I wanted to say something. Ask how his day was, maybe. But I stopped myself. It felt like too much work, like opening a door that no one would notice anyway. Back home, I fed Nino, then sat with him on the porch. He curled up beside my feet, his breathing soft and rhythmic. I looked out at the empty street and thought, maybe I'll go to the park again tomorrow. Not for the people, not for the bench, but for the girl who saw me, and the dog who stayed. Some nights I can't sleep. The bed feels too big, the walls too close. The ceiling fan hums like a tired old man sighing in circles. I get up and wander the house barefoot, quiet, like a ghost in my own skin. Last night was one of those nights. I found myself in the hallway, the one that leads to the den where Margaret kept all the photo albums. She was meticulous about them, each one labeled by decade. The early years, the kids, retirement adventures. Every photo was dated. She even added notes sometimes, small captions written in blue ink, with little hearts curling around the letters. I hadn't touched those albums since she passed, but something pulled me toward them. Maybe it was the quiet. Maybe it was the way Nino, sleeping by the front door, lifted his head and looked at me like he understood what I needed, like grief had taught him to sense it in others. I sat on the floor. The carpet still held the faint scent of her lotion, lavender and something else, almond maybe. She always smelled like calm, like home. I opened the first album. There we were, young, laughing, full of color. Her hair was long then, dark and wild. I remember how she hated it, called it unruly. But I loved how it danced when she spun in the kitchen to the sound of old jazz records. She had a habit of lifting one eyebrow when she didn't believe what I was saying. A tiny defiance that always made me smile. There was a photo of us on the porch steps the day we moved in, her arms around my neck, both of us holding paintbrushes. The wall behind us was half covered in a bold, terrible yellow we later painted over. But that photo, she refused to throw it away. "This is us," she'd say. "Messy, happy, learning as we go." I turned the pages slowly, as if rushing would break something fragile. The kids came next, first Emma, then David. Tiny fingers, toothless grins, birthday cakes with crooked candles. So many ordinary moments caught forever. A paper crown, a chocolate-smeared face, a sleepy child curled in her lap. I saw myself, too, in those pictures. Thinner, younger. Eyes full of the kind of tired joy only parents know. But in every photo, every single one, Margaret was the center. Not because she posed that way, but because she drew your eye. She glowed. Even in silence, she filled the frame. I found a photo tucked between two pages, not glued, just loosely placed. It was faded around the edges. She and I were sitting on a beach, legs buried in the sand. She was wearing that wide-brimmed hat she always said made her look sophisticated. I had my arm around her, my hand resting gently on her belly. That was the year she miscarried. We never told many people. It was early. The doctor said it was common. But for Margaret, it wasn't just a loss. It was a child, a heartbeat she had already named. I remembered that trip vividly, how we pretended everything was fine, how she smiled through it, and how I held her that night while she cried into my chest, trying not to wake the waves. I stared at that photo for a long time. Some griefs never leave. They just wait. I flipped to the last album, the most recent. Us in Autumn, she had written on the front. The final page held a photo from last year. Her in the garden, holding up a sunflower twice her size. She was thinner then, her smile a little tighter, but her eyes still danced. I ran my fingers over the glossy page. My hand trembled. That's when I cried. Not loud, not dramatic, just quiet tears, falling one after another, like something sacred had finally broken loose. I didn't sob. I didn't shake. I just let the water fall. I hadn't cried like that, not since the sock. Later, I brought the albums into the living room. I placed them on the coffee table where they could be seen. Not hidden away like relics. They were her, and I wanted her back where she belonged. Nino padded in, ears perked, tail low. He sat beside me on the rug and pressed his head against my knee. I scratched behind his ear without thinking. It felt natural now, like something I'd always done. "I miss her," I whispered. His tail wagged once. Maybe he didn't understand the words, but I think he understood the weight behind them. I made tea. Not the usual 2 cups, just one. But I set it next to the albums, next to her. For the first time in weeks, I lit the candle she always kept on the mantel, the one with the little crack along the side she refused to throw away. She used to say, "Cracks let the light through." I think I'm starting to believe her. It came just after midnight. Sharp, urgent. A single bark. I had been drifting between sleep and memory. That half space where I still hear her voice sometimes. It wasn't a dream this time. It was real. Loud enough to cut through the walls. I sat up in bed, breath caught in my throat. For a second, I thought maybe it was her calling my name. My mind still plays tricks like that. Still hears her footsteps coming down the hall. Still expects the creak of her hand on the bedroom door. But then I heard it again. A bark, followed by a whimper. I threw off the covers and went to the front window. The porch light still glowed in a soft pool, casting shadows across the steps. And there he was, Nino, pacing back and forth, something wild in his movement. His ears were pinned back, tail low, eyes scanning the street like he was waiting for something, or afraid of something. I opened the door. "What is it, boy?" He barked once more, then ran toward the gate, stopped, turned back to look at me. There was urgency in his body, in the way he trembled. I didn't think. I just grabbed my coat and followed. The air was cold for spring. The kind of cold that doesn't bother your skin, but sinks right into your chest. The moon hung low, fat and yellow, and the street was silent. No cars, no voices, only the click of Nino's claws on the sidewalk. He led me 2 blocks down, past the closed bakery and the church that always leaves its porch light on. We turned a corner, and I saw it. A cardboard box, torn open. Movement inside. I slowed. Nino approached first, sniffed carefully, then looked back at me, tail stiff. I knelt beside it. Inside were 2 small puppies, shivering, eyes wide, confused. One was missing fur on its side. The other let out a soft whine. No mother, no food, just crumpled flyers and an old sock for warmth. Somebody had dumped them, left them here in the dark. And Nino, he must have heard them, or smelled them, or remembered. I carried the box home while Nino walked beside me. Neither of us made a sound. Not even the wind dared speak. When we reached the house, I placed them gently on the kitchen floor, found an old blanket in the laundry room and laid it down. They curled into it immediately, their tiny bodies pressed against one another for warmth. Nino didn't go far. He sat in the doorway watching, his head tilted slightly, eyes alert but calm. Not jealous, not afraid, just present, as if he understood they belonged here now too. I warmed some milk on the stove, poured it into a shallow dish, dipped a finger to check the temperature, just like Margaret used to do when the grandkids were babies. The smaller one drank first, hesitant, then hungry. The other followed. I sat on the floor with my back against the cupboard, legs stretched out, and watched them eat. My eyes stung. Not from grief this time, from something else. Something that felt like purpose. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat with them, all three of them, until the first light of morning crept through the window. It was the kind of sunrise Margaret would have loved. Soft, golden, a sky the color of peach flesh and honey. The puppies curled into each other again. Nino lay beside them, his head resting protectively on his front paws. Every so often, he'd lift it to check on them, then close his eyes again. I whispered, "You saved them, Nino." He didn't respond, of course, but I swear, in that moment, his body relaxed, like he knew. There was something in me that changed that night, not all at once, but enough. Enough to feel the edges of hope again, enough to want the next morning to come. "I'm not keeping him." That's what I said the first morning Nino showed up. I said it out loud, to the empty kitchen, to no one in particular. I remember standing at the sink, rinsing out a bowl while he sat just outside the screen door, his nose pressed against the mesh, waiting. "I'm not keeping him," I repeated. He tilted his head like he'd heard that before. Maybe he had. Maybe too many times. But I left the door open anyway. That was weeks ago. And now here he was, stretched out at the foot of the couch, two rescued puppies sleeping soundly beside him, the soft rise and fall of their bellies synchronized with his. And me? I was talking to dogs like they were people, which, come to think of it, might be exactly what I needed. I didn't name the puppies right away. It felt heavy somehow, like naming them would seal something I wasn't ready to accept. Margaret always named every stray we ever fed. She said it made them feel real, said it gave them dignity. She was right, of course. But I was still learning how to live without her voice reminding me of the things that mattered. Still, over the next few days, the names came to me quietly, not in a grand moment, but in the hush between feeding and sitting, walking and thinking. The fluffier one with the limp tail? I called her Penny. The quieter, leaner one with the patchy fur? Button. Penny and Button. I don't know why. The names just fit. They made the house feel alive again. Not loud, not overwhelming, just alive. The first time I laughed, really laughed, was on a Tuesday morning. Penny had discovered the laundry basket. I heard a crash, followed by an explosion of socks and underclothes flying across the hallway. I turned the corner and there she was, tail wagging, completely buried in a pile of my old t-shirts, like it was the greatest treasure trove in the world. Button, ever the observer, sat nearby, head cocked in judgment. I stood there, arms crossed, pretending to be annoyed, but I was smiling. And then I laughed. It came out of me like a cough at first, like my body wasn't used to the sound. Then it grew, and suddenly I was laughing so hard I had to sit down. It echoed off the walls. And for a moment, just one moment, the house didn't feel like a tomb anymore. Of course, the neighbors began to notice. Mrs. Keller across the street leaned over the fence one afternoon. She hadn't spoken to me in months, not since the service. "Are those yours?" she asked, nodding toward the dogs sniffing around the front step. I hesitated. "No," I said. "They just found me." She smiled. "That's how the best ones do." I nodded. "They're not staying." She raised an eyebrow. "You keep saying that, Harold. But you've got 3 bowls out front, and I heard you humming when you brought in the mail." I paused. "I hum?" She nodded. "You do now." I think that's when it hit me. They weren't guests anymore. They were here. They were mine, and I was theirs. I found myself waking with a sense of structure again. Morning walks, feeding schedules, bathing days. Nino was patient with them, more than I expected, Sometimes I'd catch him watching them with the same eyes I saw in the mirror, tired, protective, quietly grateful. I stopped saying, "They're not staying," because they were. They already had. One evening, as I set out their food, I whispered something I hadn't said in weeks. "Thank you." Not to the dogs, not to Margaret, just to the quiet, to whatever grace had led them to me. Maybe it was her. Maybe this was her last gift. Not a goodbye, but a soft hand guiding me towards something worth holding on to. That night, with Nino curled up on the rug and Penny and Button snoring lightly nearby, I sat down with a pen and paper. I wrote the date, and under it, 5 words. Today, the silence didn't win. It's strange how long I fed him, talked to him, even walked with him, without giving him a name. I suppose part of me was afraid to. Naming something makes it real, makes it yours. I wasn't ready for that kind of belonging. Not again. Not after I had just lost the one name that meant everything. But life has a quiet way of naming things for you. And it was a little girl, freckles, braids, and a voice like sunlight, who looked at me in the park and said without hesitation, "You look like someone who'd name a dog something old-fashioned. Like Nino." At the time, I laughed, just a breath through my nose, but the name stayed, settled inside me. And the next morning, when I opened the door and saw him waiting on the porch, tail wagging once, eyes alert but gentle, I said it. "Nino." He tilted his head, blinked once, and then he came to me, as if he had always been waiting to hear it. From that moment, it changed. He wasn't just the dog. He was Nino. A name makes space. It creates a thread. And in naming him, I think I allowed something I had been resisting. A connection. A second life. I said his name aloud a dozen times that day. "Nino, come here. Nino, leave the slippers alone. Nino, you're not getting on the couch. All right, just for a minute." And I caught myself smiling after each one. There was a rhythm forming between us, a quiet companionship that didn't ask questions, didn't press or prod, just existed. The puppies were growing quickly. Penny, always adventurous, had taken a liking to chasing butterflies across the backyard. Button, quieter and more careful, liked to follow Nino around like a shadow. I started calling them the kids, without even thinking about it. One morning, as I watched all 3 of them wrestle in the grass, I said aloud, "Margaret would have loved this." And I knew it was true. She had always believed animals came into our lives for a reason, that each one carried something with them, a lesson, a healing, a gift we didn't know we needed. She would have knelt down, cupped Nino's face in her hands, and whispered, "You're safe now." That's how she was. She never needed many words to love something. Later that day, I found an old collar in the garage, leather, worn but intact. One of our past dogs, Samson, I think, had worn it years ago. I wiped it down, cleaned the buckle, and attached a small tag I had made at the hardware store. It simply said, "Nino." No phone number, no address, just the name. I fastened it around his neck and stepped back. "There," I said. "Now the whole world knows you're somebody." He wagged his tail once and leaned his head into my hand. That night, for the first time since Margaret passed, I sat outside with a mug of tea and felt something close to peace. Not joy, not yet, but a softness, like something inside me had finally unclenched. Naming him didn't bring her back, but it made the space she left feel less like a wound and more like a garden. Quiet, tended, still growing. Sometimes when the wind is just right, I swear I hear her humming. The same tune she used to hum when folding laundry or watering the violets on the windowsill. A lullaby without words. A sound that only made sense to someone who had spent a lifetime listening to it. I like to think she hears me say his name, that she smiles when I do. "Nino," I say again quietly, as he settles beside me on the porch. He rests his head on my shoe, and together we watch the world go by. I used to avoid walking during the day, After Margaret died, I'd only step out early in the morning before most people were awake, when the world still whispered and hadn't yet found its voice. I didn't want to be seen, not like that, not hollowed out, not alone. But Nino didn't seem to care what time it was. He didn't wait for the sun to be low or the streets to be empty. He'd nudge me near the door around midday, tail swaying, eyes clear, body alert, as if to say, "You're still here, so let's move." At first I resisted, pretended not to notice, sat in my chair and stared through the window. But one Wednesday, when the sky was that kind of perfect pale blue, and the breeze carried the smell of cut grass and fresh bread from the corner bakery, I stood up. "All right," I sighed. "Let's try." I clipped the leash to his collar, a formality more than anything, he never strayed far, and opened the gate. He stepped out confidently, with the kind of grace only creatures who have known abandonment can carry. I followed. The first few blocks were quiet, residential, familiar. Fences I'd fixed years ago. Mailboxes I'd helped dig out during storms. Memories clung to the sidewalks like fallen leaves. Neighbors we'd shared meals with, kids we'd watched grow. But something had changed. Not in the street, in me. I wasn't shrinking this time. I wasn't hoping to disappear. I was walking beside someone, even if he walked on four legs. About 6 blocks in, we passed the small park, the same one I hadn't dared to visit for months after the funeral. I paused at the entrance. Nino looked up at me. "You really want to go in there?" I asked. He did. So we did. It wasn't as crowded as last time. A few parents with strollers, a boy on a scooter, an older woman sitting on a bench with a thermos. I avoided eye contact, but I didn't hide. We took the long loop around the rose beds. The sun hit just right through the trees, dappling the path in gold. The scent of blooming flowers filled the air. I could hear laughter, soft, not directed at me. And it didn't sting like before. Then I heard a voice. "Excuse me, sir. What's his name?" I turned. A man in his 30s, wearing sunglasses and holding the leash of a tiny, trembling chihuahua. He smiled politely, not intrusive. "Nino," I said. "His name is Nino." The man bent slightly, addressing my dog. "Well, hello, Nino. You're very handsome." Nino wagged his tail once, then sat, calm, present, not needing to prove anything. I looked back at the man and said something I hadn't said in a long time. "Nice day for a walk." He nodded. "Best part of my lunch break." And that was it. No awkward silence, no sad looks. Just 2 people in a park, 2 dogs, a brief moment of shared humanity. As we rounded the final stretch of path, a little girl, maybe 5 or 6, ran up with a crumpled piece of paper in her hand. "Can I pet your dog?" she asked, already reaching before I could answer. Nino didn't flinch. He stood still, tail low, eyes soft. I nodded. She crouched and ran her fingers along his back, then whispered something into his ear. I didn't catch it, but Nino licked her cheek gently, and she giggled like she'd just received the most precious secret. Then she was gone, off toward a woman who waved from a distance. And I realized something. I wasn't ashamed anymore. Not of being alone, not of being seen, not of smiling without her beside me. We walked home the long way, past the bakery where I bought a loaf of warm sourdough. The cashier, a teenage girl with pink headphones, offered Nino a biscuit from a jar on the counter. "He's well behaved," she said. "He's good company," I replied. And I meant it. Back at the house, I fed the dogs, then sat on the porch with a slice of bread and some tea, the same spot where Margaret used to sit with her knitting. The same light, now a little softer. I looked down at Nino, curled near my feet. "You brought me back," I said. He didn't respond, but I think he knew. It hit me the moment I opened the oven. That smell. Sweet, warm, a little nutty, with the faintest edge of buttered crust. Cornbread. Margaret's cornbread. She used to bake it every other Sunday. always in the same dented cast iron skillet her mother gave her when we got married. Said the iron held flavor like memory, that every loaf tasted like all the ones before it. It had been nearly a year since I'd touched that pan. It sat at the back of the cabinet, cold and heavy, like a stone from another life. I only pulled it out that morning because Penny had knocked over the cereal box, and Button had dragged the empty milk carton under the kitchen table. And for some reason, that chaos made me laugh. And once I laughed, I realized I was hungry. Not just for food, for comfort, for her. I found the old recipe tucked in a drawer, her handwriting curling like vines across a yellowed index card, smudged with grease and flour, still legible. 1 cup cornmeal, 1 cup flour, 1 to 4 cup sugar, 1 egg, 1 cup buttermilk. I read it twice, then got to work. I didn't rush. Margaret never did. She believed cooking was about presence, that the act of making something, slowly, deliberately, was a kind of love, a kind of prayer. So I followed her rhythm, measured, mixed, warmed the skillet just right. When I poured the batter in and slid it into the oven, I half expected to hear her say, "Don't forget the toothpick test." That's when the smell came back. It filled the kitchen, then spilled into the hallway, up the stairs, into the creases of the curtains. It was her, not literally, but in every way that mattered. I stood by the oven and closed my eyes. I could see her again, hips swaying slightly as she moved, humming a half-finished tune, wearing that blue apron with the little stitched chicken she always said was hideous. She'd wink at me over her shoulder and say, "Well, if you don't like the apron, don't eat the cornbread." I always ate the cornbread. When the timer rang, I didn't hesitate. I pulled it out and set it on the cooling rack, golden, steaming, slightly cracked on top, just the way she liked it. The dogs appeared like magic. Penny sat first, ears perked. Button circled the table twice before settling beside her. Nino waited near the back door, respectful, as always. I cut 3 small pieces and placed them in their bowls. "This is special," I told them. This was hers. They didn't care about the meaning, of course. Just the smell. But I cared. I watched them eat, tails wagging, and felt something shift in my chest. Not grief, not nostalgia, gratitude. I sat down with my own slice, still warm, still perfect. 1 bite, and the years folded in on themselves. Every Sunday morning, every fight that ended in shared silence over cornbread, every celebration, every sadness we softened with butter in a skillet. I ate slowly, tears welling but not falling, and I whispered, "Thank you." To her, to the house, to the dogs, to whatever force decided I deserved this small return of warmth. Afterward, I cleaned the pan by hand, just like she used to. No soap, just hot water and a worn cloth. I dried it gently, then set it on the stove where it belonged, and I promised, out loud this time, I'll bake again next Sunday. It wasn't a ritual yet, but it was a beginning. Later that night, I found myself writing again. A single line. The house still holds her. Not in the way it used to. Not in voices or footsteps or familiar routines, but in scent, in memory, in flavor, in cornbread. It started with the wind. Not a breeze, not the gentle rustling kind Margaret used to say sounded like the trees whispering secrets. No, this wind came heavy, in hard gusts, rattling the windows and slamming shut the half-latched gate out back. The sky turned the color of steel. Birds vanished. Air thickened. And I felt something shift inside me. Not panic exactly, but a tremble. A memory my body hadn't forgotten. The last time the sky turned like that, I was sitting in a hospital room, listening to her breaths grow farther apart. Storms unsettle things, not just in the world, in the heart. The dogs were restless too. Penny paced. Button whimpered and crawled under the table. But Nino stood at the door, still, tail stiff, ears forward. He sensed it before I did. I opened the door to check the yard. The wind tore at my face. Branches snapped somewhere down the street. The sky opened with a sudden crack of thunder that felt like it split the road in half. I turned to close the door, and that's when I noticed Nino was gone. Panic doesn't hit all at once. It comes in short, sharp bursts. First a jolt in the chest, then the rush to the porch, then the run down the steps barefoot, then the shouting. Nino. No answer, just wind. Rain starting to fall sideways. And the dull, sick ache of that old, awful feeling. Not again, please, not again. I ran down the street, calling his name. Rain soaked through my shirt in seconds. My heart pounded in ways it hadn't in years. Not since the night Margaret collapsed at the kitchen sink. Not since the ambulance. Not since the lights. Not since the waiting room silence. I kept calling. Nino. Nothing. I thought of the way he leaned into my hand the day I named him. The way his eyes followed me around the kitchen like he was memorizing my movements. The way he rested his head on my shoe like it meant something. I couldn't lose him too. I wouldn't survive it. A flash of lightning lit up the park entrance. A shape, small, hunched, under the gazebo. I ran. My legs burned, rain in my eyes, breath ragged. But I reached the gazebo and fell to my knees on the wet concrete. There he was, curled in a tight ball, tail wrapped around his body, eyes blinking slow. Nino, I whispered, voice cracking. He lifted his head, whimpered once, then slowly stood and stepped toward me. I held his face in my hands. Why'd you run, boy? I said, pressing my forehead to his. He didn't answer. Didn't need to. Some part of him, just like some part of me, still expected that love doesn't stay, that it's safest to leave first. We walked home in the rain, slow, quiet, side by side, no leash, no rush. Just two souls soaked through, learning how to stay. Back at the house, I dried him with an old towel. The puppies rushed to him, nuzzling, checking, licking his ears. He let them, without protest, then laid down in the corner close enough for them to curl into him. I sat on the floor, watching them breathe. My hands trembled. I hadn't realized how tightly I'd been gripping the towel. That storm didn't just knock down tree limbs. It knocked something loose in me, something I didn't know was still afraid. Later, I lit the candle on the mantel again, the one with the little crack down the side. I used to think I couldn't survive another loss, but maybe grief isn't about surviving. Maybe it's about staying open, even when it rains, even when it hurts. Nino looked at me from his corner, not afraid, not gone, here. And I whispered to the storm outside, to whatever still listens in this world. This time, nothing runs away. The morning after the storm was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears. Not peaceful, not still, just empty. The sky was pale, washed out, the way it gets after a long night of thunder and sobbing wind. I moved slower than usual. My legs still ached from running through the rain. My chest carried a soreness that wasn't just physical. There's a cost to loving again, even if it's a dog. Especially if it's a dog that looks at you like you're the only stable thing left in the world. I poured my tea, sat on the porch, the wood beneath me still damp. Nino was at my feet, drowsy, warm, eyes half closed. Penny and Button wrestled in the grass, yipping and tumbling like nothing had happened. But I kept watching Nino, the way he stayed close now, like he understood what it meant to leave and to return. I don't know what made me do it, but later that afternoon, I opened the hallway closet. The one Margaret used to keep for emergency memories, as she called it. Old coats, boxes of photographs we never framed, a folded quilt made by her grandmother, and one small cardboard box labeled in her handwriting, Harold for after. I stared at it for a long time. I had seen it before. Once, the day after the funeral, I saw the label and couldn't bring myself to open it. I shoved it to the back, buried it under a blanket, closed the door. But now, somehow, with Nino watching from the kitchen and the soft snoring of the puppies behind me, I was ready. Inside were letters, one for Emma, one for David, and one for me. She'd written my name on it like she always did on birthday cards, to Harold, who always forgets where he put his reading glasses. I unfolded the page with trembling hands. Her handwriting was softer now, slower, but still hers, still graceful. I won't copy every word here. Some things belong only to the soul, but she said she knew I'd be angry at first, that I'd push everyone away, that I'd pretend I was fine until the silence ate me alive. She wrote that she hoped, in the quietest part of the grief, I'd find something worth loving again. And then this line, "If anything shows up on 4 legs with tired eyes, let it stay, Harold. It's me, in a different shape." I broke, right there in the hallway, sitting on the cold floor with her letter in my hands. I cried in a way I hadn't allowed myself to cry. It wasn't the kind of sobbing that folds your body in half. It was deeper than that. It was surrender. Nino padded over, slow and silent. He sat beside me and pressed his body against mine, just enough to say, "I'm here." I looked at him through watery eyes. "You brought me back, didn't you?" I whispered. He didn't move, didn't need to. That evening I took him for a walk. Just him and me. No puppies, no leash, no destination. We went further than usual. Down roads I hadn't visited since before the hospital. Past the flower shop Margaret used to love, where she'd pick up marigolds just because they were smiling that day. Past the old bookstore where we once got locked in during a rainstorm and spent an hour reading poetry aloud to each other under flickering lights. And finally, we came to the hill, the one behind the community center, where the grass grows tall and the city feels far away. I sat on the bench at the top and looked out. Nino lay beside me, and in that moment it was as if I could feel her again, not beside me, not in any physical sense, but within, in the warmth of the dog leaning against my leg, in the air filling my lungs without struggle, in the steadiness of my heartbeat. I had found something in Nino, but more than that, I had found myself again, the part of me that could still hold joy, still risk love, still say yes to what remained. We stayed until the sky blushed gold, until the wind softened, until the world reminded us, gently, that it keeps moving, whether we're ready or not. When we stood to leave, I looked down at him and said, "Let's go home, boy." And for the first time in a long time, I meant that word, home. She showed up on a Wednesday morning. I was in the garden, pulling weeds from around the basil Margaret planted 2 summers ago. The last summer she really felt like herself. Nino was sprawled beneath the lemon tree, eyes half closed. Penny and Button were off chasing butterflies with their usual lack of coordination. At first, I thought it was a delivery person walking up the path. I nearly waved her off without looking. But then I heard a familiar voice, soft but certain. "Hi, Mr. Danner." I turned. It was Claire Thomas. She used to live 2 houses down with her mother. She was maybe 10 years old the last time I saw her up close. Freckled nose, gap in her front teeth. Always had grass in her hair and carried notebooks like they were treasure chests. Now she stood on my path, a young woman, early 20s maybe, a clipboard in hand. Same kind eyes, though. "I hope it's okay," she said, hesitating. "I didn't know if you'd remember me." I smiled. "Of course I remember you. You once filled my mailbox with drawings of cats wearing tiaras." She laughed, cheeks coloring. "I was going through a princess phase. You made my bills more bearable." She stepped forward, then knelt to greet Nino, who, surprisingly, didn't flinch. He even wagged his tail a little, a rare show of affection for a stranger. "Well," she said, scratching behind his ears, You've made a new friend." "So have I replied. She looked around the garden. "This place still smells like her." It stopped me. I didn't ask who she meant. She didn't need to say it. She stood slowly. "I'm sorry, I should have called. I'm helping at the local elementary school now. Volunteer work, mostly storytelling, arts. Your name came up in a conversation last week. Someone said you used to tell the best campfire stories." I raised an eyebrow. "That was a long time ago." "Well," she shrugged, "kids still need stories, especially from people who've lived them." I chuckled. "I don't know if I'm exactly engaging these days." She glanced at the dogs. "You got 3 animals following your every move. That's more engagement than most people get." She handed me a flyer. Bright colors, crooked lettering. "Grandparents and Guardians Week at Maplewood Elementary. We're short a few voices. Thought maybe you'd come by. Nothing fancy, just talk, share." I stared at the paper, the sun catching it just right, and felt Margaret somewhere behind my left shoulder whispering, "Go ahead. You've got something left to give." I cleared my throat. "I'll think about it." Claire smiled. "That's all I hoped." That night I found myself sitting at the kitchen table staring at the flyer. Nino lay nearby, head on his paws, occasionally glancing up at me like he could sense the weight in the paper. "Storytelling," I said aloud. "I haven't told a story since her." Margaret was always my best audience. She'd sit at the edge of the porch, hands folded in her lap, smiling with her whole face. Even when the stories weren't good, she made me feel like they mattered. Now the thought of sharing them with a room full of children made my palms sweat. But it also made something stir in me. A flicker, a pulse, a small invitation from life itself. Come out, speak, be seen again. The next morning I called the number on the flyer. Claire answered on the second ring. "You changed your mind, didn't you?" "I did," I said, "but only if I can bring someone with me." "Your dog?" "And the 2 small disasters who follow him." She laughed. "Deal." That weekend, I sat down with a notebook and tried to remember the stories I used to tell. About lost treasure, talking frogs, haunted lighthouses, and time-traveling uncles. But what came out instead were memories of Margaret. Not dramatic ones, just simple stories. The day we met in a bookstore during a rainstorm. The time we got a flat tire and ended up watching the stars from a ditch on Route 11. The summer she made me eat zucchini 3 times a day because the garden wouldn't stop producing. Those were the stories I wanted to tell. Not because they were thrilling, but because they were true. And sometimes truth is the most magical thing of all. I hadn't walked into an elementary school in over 30 years. The air still smelled like pencil shavings and hand sanitizer. Somewhere down the hall, a child laughed. A shrill, joyful sound that startled something awake inside me. Something old and tender. Claire met me at the front door. She wore a name tag and that same gentle smile. "Glad you came," she said, leading me through a corridor lined with drawings of rainbows and stick figure families. "I've been telling the kids you have the best stories in the world." I raised an eyebrow. "Setting the bar a little high, aren't we?" She grinned. "Kids don't need the best. Just something real." I carried a small bag over my shoulder. Inside, I had an old photo of Margaret and me, sitting on the porch with cups of tea. I wasn't planning to show it, but I needed it with me, like armor. Nino padded beside me. The kids had been told about him, and Claire made sure we'd cleared any allergies or fears. Penny and Button were staying home, still a bit too excitable for a classroom. But Nino walked like he belonged there. The classroom was warm, carpeted, walls bursting with color. Around 15 children sat in a circle, legs crossed, eyes wide with curiosity. When I entered, a few whispered, "That's him. That's the man with the dog." "Is the dog gonna talk too?" Claire introduced me. I just nodded and said, "Hi, I'm Harold." Then I sat down in the chair they'd left for me, with Nino settling at my feet. His tail brushed my shoe twice. like a quiet reassurance. The kids waited. No one fidgeted. It was that sacred silence, the kind people offer when they want to hear you. I didn't read from a book, didn't need to. Instead, I told them the story of the day Margaret and I got caught in a storm at the beach. How we lost our umbrella, got soaked to the bone, and ended up dancing barefoot in the rain because we had nothing else to lose. I changed a few things, made a seagull talk, gave our car a name, added a jellyfish that offered relationship advice. The kids laughed, not forced giggles, but real laughter, the kind that bubbles up and fills a room like light. And as they laughed, something happened. My voice came back, not just the sound, but the part of me that used to use it. I told them another story about a dog named Samson, who once stole an entire roast chicken off our dining table and buried it under Margaret's rose bushes. And then another, a true one, about how she made me eat zucchini pancakes for an entire week one summer and swore it was good for my joints. They laughed again, and I laughed too, not out of politeness, not out of nostalgia, because I was in it, fully. When I paused, a small hand shot up, a boy in the back. He looked barely 7. "Is that your dog?" he asked, pointing to Nino. "Yes," I said. "What's his story?" I looked down at Nino. "That's a good question," I replied. "He used to live outside, cold nights, empty bowls. A lot of people passed him by. But one day, he came to my porch." The boy leaned forward. And I wasn't looking for a dog, but maybe he was looking for someone." Another girl raised her hand. "So, he saved you?" The room went quiet. I opened my mouth, closed it, then said, "Yes, I think he did." Afterward, the children came up one by one to pet Nino, ask about his favorite treats, tell me their own dog stories. One gave me a sticker that said, "You're my favorite grown-up." Another handed me a folded piece of paper with a drawing of me, Nino, and a house with smoke curling out of the chimney. I tucked it into my coat pocket like it was gold. Claire watched it all from the doorway. When the last child waved goodbye, she walked over. "You were amazing," she said. I was just honest. That's all they needed. On the way home, Nino sat in the passenger seat, nose to the window. The sun was just starting to fall, casting the world in that golden light Margaret always called the end-of-day hush. I reached into my coat and pulled out the drawing. 3 figures, smiling, and in the corner, the child had written, in uneven letters, "Love doesn't go away, it just grows somewhere new." That night I made tea. 1 cup. But this time I didn't set it beside an empty chair. I held it in both hands and stood by the window. Outside, the dogs played in the yard. Inside, my voice, the one I thought I'd buried, wet and whispered, "You're not finished, Harold. Not yet." I hadn't realized how much lighter I'd become, not in body. The scale still told the same old truth, but in spirit, in step. There was less weight dragging behind me, less of that invisible heaviness that grief hides in your shoes. I walked to the park that morning with a slow, steady rhythm. The air was crisp, that gentle in-between of late spring and early summer, when the grass smells fresh and the sky still has a softness to it. The kind of morning Margaret used to call a morning that forgives you. Nino trotted ahead, tail high but lazy. We didn't need a leash anymore. He never strayed far. We knew each other's pace. He jumped up onto the bench before I even reached it, the old wooden one near the roses. Margaret's bench. Our bench. He claimed her spot, sprawled across the slats like a king on his throne. I sat beside him, letting the sun warm my knees, and I smiled. Not because something was funny, not because someone was watching, just because it felt good to be here, to be. The park was quiet, a few joggers, a young couple with a stroller, birds skimming the grass like they had somewhere important to be. I watched it all like a man watching a play he used to perform in. Familiar, but distant enough to admire. A little girl rode past on a bike with streamers, her father jogging close behind. She waved. I waved back. I didn't shrink. I didn't look away. That used to be the hardest part, after Margaret. Being seen, feeling like people only looked at me as the man who lost his wife. Like my sadness was the only thing I had left to wear. But now I was something else too. A man with a dog, a man who told stories, a man who'd found softness in a world he thought had gone cold. Nino shifted, pressing his body lightly against my leg. I scratched behind his ear and he gave a soft huff, the dog version of a sigh. "I think she'd like this," I murmured. "Us, right here." A breeze moved through the trees. Not a sign, not a voice, just a moment, quiet, sacred. I remembered something Margaret once said years ago on this very bench. It was after she'd lost her sister. We were sitting in silence, the sky darkening, her eyes red from crying. I didn't know what to say, so I didn't speak. She reached out, took my hand and whispered, "Sometimes you don't move on, Harold. You just move with it." Back then I nodded, pretending I understood. But now I did. Now I knew what it meant to carry sorrow without letting it define your shape. To love someone without keeping the door to the past bolted shut. To smile alone, not because you forgot, but because you remember with peace instead of pain. We stayed on that bench a long time. I didn't rush. I didn't need to. At one point, an older man walked by with a cane and paused. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, nodding to the far end of the bench. I slid over. "Plenty of room." He sat slowly, adjusting his knee. "Nice dog," he said. "Thanks. His name's Nino." "Strong name." I nodded. "For a strong soul." We sat there, two strangers sharing the silence, watching the world hum by. And I thought, this is it. Not healing, not the end of grief, but the middle of something new. When I stood to leave, I looked back at the bench, at the spot where she used to sit, where I used to ache. Now it was just wood, and sunlight, and memory, soft, and light, and kind. We walked home, no words, just the sound of birds, leaves, my shoes on the path, and the steady rhythm of paws beside me. I set the table like I always used to. 2 cups, 1 plate, and now a small ceramic bowl on the floor. It's a quiet ritual, no ceremony, no music playing in the background. Just the soft sound of the kettle heating and the faint tapping of dog nails on wood as Nino circles the table, waiting. The house doesn't feel empty anymore. It feels lived in. There are scratch marks by the back door where Penny jumps when it's breakfast time. There's a frayed edge on the living room rug from Button's never-ending war with her tail. And Nino, well, Nino has claimed the armchair Margaret used to read in. He doesn't sprawl. He sits like he knows it mattered, and I let him. I poured the tea slowly. Earl Grey, the same blend Margaret used to choose. Still from the little tin with her handwriting on the side. 2 spoons, not 3, Harold. I still overdo it, on purpose now, like a joke between us. I sat in my chair, the sun just starting to climb through the window. Morning light always made the house feel softer, like the corners were less sharp. Margaret used to say that light like this made people remember who they are. I looked down. Nino sat patiently, tail tucked, watching. Beside him, the 2 pups waited, Penny's ears alert, Button's nose twitching. I reached over and placed their dishes on the floor, a bit of cornbread for each, with a spoonful of peanut butter Margaret would have called outrageous. But I didn't care. They'd earned it. We ate together. No conversation, just company. Afterward, I stayed in my chair, the tea cooling in my hands. I wasn't in a hurry to move. The dogs had curled together on the rug. Nino always the anchor, the pups draped across him like vines. I stared at the opposite chair, hers, and didn't feel the ache I used to. Didn't feel that stabbing grief. the one that used to demand silence and stillness and withdrawal. Instead, I felt warmth, presence, like the shape of her still sat with me, like she hadn't gone, not completely. I reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the photo I always kept nearby now. It was one of the last we took together, her in the garden, face turned to the sky, dirt on her hands, that smile that made you believe everything was going to be all right. I set the photo gently on the table. "Morning," I said quietly. It didn't feel strange anymore talking to her like that, because this wasn't about holding on to the past. It was about welcoming it, inviting it in, letting it sit beside the present. That day, I planted something new in her garden. Not a rose bush, those were hers, but something simple. Marigolds, bright, unapologetic, messy in the wind. They reminded me of the children at the school, of the way laughter filled that classroom like music. They reminded me of the girl on the bike who waved with her whole arm. They reminded me of Margaret too, not because she loved them, but because she would have. As the sun began to set, I returned to the porch. One chair, one dog beside me, the others napping somewhere nearby. The light turned gold again, that deep, warm gold that touches everything like it's giving it permission to rest. I closed my eyes, breathed deep, and whispered something into the hush of that perfect hour. "I'm okay." It wasn't a declaration. It wasn't loud, just true. If grief was a room, I had learned to open the window, to let in air, to let in life. And in that space, love had come back, in a slower, quieter shape. 4 legs, a tilted head, a steady heartbeat against my foot at night. This was not the life I planned. It was the one that found me, and that, I've learned, is the most sacred kind of life. Some people leave, and everything falls silent. But sometimes, if you stay very still, you hear a new sound rising, a paw against the porch, a tail on wood, a breath beside your own, and suddenly, you're not alone anymore. If this story touched you, tell me. Have you ever been saved by something unexpected? I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. We're never as alone as we think. Thank you for sitting with me through this story. Harold.